Robin has 3 qualities that make them pretty incredible. Number 1, we all know about Veteran. It reduces the amount of training needed to make Robin into a powerhouse that can one-shot enemies and take minimal damage from their attacks. There's no decision to be made here. Robin starts with Veteran, and you will always have access to it. Second is a quality that makes Robin one of the most flexible units in any team building scenario. Robin has the ability to access every class in the game, specific to their gender. This often gets overrated and simplified down to the idea of, well, Robin has every class, therefore they are really good. But the truth is, you don't need every class in this game. You only need the classes that you are going to use. For most builds, Robin is not going to be running Great Knight and Valkyrie in the same playthrough, so having both of them doesn't boost Robin's viability in any measurable way for that character, not the way some people are advertising this idea. Having said that, overrated does not mean bad, and the amount of flexibility provided by this wide class pool is often a very meaningful trait that does set Robin apart from most other characters, at least in the initial phase when you're building your team and deciding on your builds. This wide range of classes does provide a useful opportunity. You almost never hit a dead end when you're planning Robin's build, but most other Generation 1 characters are incomplete in some way. Donald would really like to have Sniper, or Swordmaster, or Berserker, and yet he has none of these classes. Robin has all 3. You don't need to use all 3 in a single playthrough, but if you are running Robin as a bow, a sword, or an axe unit, you can always get the relevant fair skill. Another good example is Miriel. She's actually really good because she can do mage into sage into sorcerer. That's a really awesome class progression, and it's really powerful, and most characters cannot do this. There's no other first generation character that can actually do this naturally. This progression allows her to get Magic +2, Focus, and Tome Fair, and then jump directly into an optimal late game class with minimal training and minimal resource cost. I really can't overstate just how rare and how good it is for a character to have this supernatural, really smooth class progression. Almost no one else has this. Saria and Henry don't even have access to Mage, and if they did, they don't start in that class. The other characters, most of them, can never go into Dark Mage or Sorcerer. Even Libra, who has Mage and Dark Mage, has his own problem. He starts in War Cleric. In order to mimic the power of Miriel, you need to reset him into a Mage as a base class unit, level up with a massively inflated internal level, which is going to slow down his training. His stat caps are going to be lower while he's fighting against promoted enemies, and then he's still struggling to catch up to your Miriel, who's already trained and way ahead of him by the same point in the game. And the reason I'm bringing all of this up is because I want to highlight that Robin is the only other character in the game who can run this exact same build that makes Miriel so good. It's basically the same for every other build, every other character. If a character has an optimal class and an optimal progression, Robin can just mimic it perfectly. And if they're missing one thing, Robin can do exactly what they're doing, but just better, because Robin isn't going to be missing that one thing. You do have one downside of starting in Tactician, but Robin joins in the very first chapter, and with Veteran, getting to level 10 or even level 20 is quite easy, and there's even an early game second seal that you can take advantage of. The game effectively hands you a free early game training arc, which you can use to make Robin copy the build of any other high-tier character on the game, or improve upon it, just depending on what role you want Robin to fill in your team for that playthrough. And finally, this brings us to the last point of customization, and the third reason, and possibly the greatest reason, why Robin is such a powerful unit. You get to choose which stats they are good at, and which stats they are bad at. Now, anyone who has played tabletop games, or any other RPGs for that matter, for enough time, probably understands where this is going. You can min-max Robin's build to make them as strong as possible. Robin isn't just versatile, okay? Robin is not this jack-of-all-trades, master of none. They can literally become the best character in any role or any stat. They are a jack of all trades and a master of any trade that you want them to master. An optimized Magic Robin has more speed and more magic compared to endgame Saria. Your optimized Strength Robin is the only first generation character who can have a higher strength than Vake. Knowing which stats are good to increase and which stats are good to decrease is going to be the point which makes or breaks any truly great Robin build. And in my opinion, this is actually the most powerful tool in Robin's kit, and mastering this system will make the difference between a good player and a great player. Because any good player can just run the brainless, really strong Robin build, but a great player understands how to level them correctly and which stats to invest into in order to make this Robin truly unstoppable. So let's talk about this system and discuss why it's so powerful at every stage in the game. When you choose your asset and flaw for Robin, you're actually adjusting 3 metrics, not just your immediate stats. You adjust your base stats, which are very important for the early game. You adjust your growths, which are good in the early game, mid-game, and the late game. And you adjust your stat caps, which are also good in the early game, the mid-game, and the late game, which is something that not everyone understands, but is very important, especially for Robin in particular, because they are very likely to hit their caps, so you want them to be as high as possible. Now, in my original video, How to Get Started in Lunatic Plus, I mentioned that there were several good Robin builds worth considering, and you could probably just get good suggestions from Reddit, from other YouTube videos, etc. But after sitting on it for a while, I really didn't like that I said this or that I left it at that. I really wanted to make my own video about this topic, because preferring to use one type of Robin is fine, but some answers are more correct than others. Some Robin builds are just objectively stronger, and if you get your answer from Reddit, it is not guaranteed to be coming from an actual expert who understands the game on the deepest level. It's most likely just going to be from someone who is really good at getting upvotes on Reddit. The problem is that the world is filled with bad and incorrect information, and if you're still learning, you have no way of knowing what is useful and what is actually false. So I'm going to do my job, and I'm going to teach you the subject material myself. Here is the most important thing that is so often overlooked. When you're picking a stat to increase, you're actually increasing 3 stats. And when you pick a stat to decrease, you're actually decreasing 3 stats. There is one exception to this rule, but it relates to HP, which you should never choose for your asset or your flaw, so we can pretty much ignore it. Now, why is this 3 stats thing so important? Okay, so first of all, people often overlook the combinations of these assets and flaws and how they interact with each other. You're often going to hear from people who are looking at a very simple view, which only looks at the main stat. If you think luck is bad, which it is, you could naturally come to the conclusion that negative luck is a great flaw. The problem is that negative luck also lowers your strength and your magic. This means if you're running a physical Robin, you're going to have less strength, and if you're running a magical Robin, you're going to have less magic. You're always lowering your damage output no matter what. And sure, it's only a minor decrease, but with a more optimal choice, you can just do the same thing without lowering your strength or lowering your magic. So why wouldn't you pick the better choice? Usually it's because you don't know that it exists. While picking a flaw, you have to keep in mind there are very, very few flaws that don't affect speed, strength, or magic in some way. In fact, there's only one. Minus defense is the only flaw that does not affect strength, magic, or speed, and it also makes Robin very difficult to keep alive in the first few chapters of the game. So how do you get around this problem? For that, let's go back to the topic of min-max. The goal isn't to keep your strength, magic, and speed all high. The goal is to pick a magic Robin or a strength Robin, and then localize your bonus into the stats that are most important for your build, and gather all of your penalties into the stats that you're not planning to use. There is one other thing that is very, very important to mention. Not all stats are created equally, and we kind of know this, right? Speed, strength, and magic are the best stats. Luck is by far the worst stat. Defense and res are going to become less important over time, and skill is nice to have, but it's not that important. The devs tried to account for this by having the base stat adjustments slightly different for each stat. If you pick luck as your flaw, you get -2 luck. But if you pick speed as your flaw, you only get -1 speed. So they understood that speed is better than luck. But here's the problem. The idea wasn't fully cooked. There are a lot of gaps in this idea that we can easily exploit. Most importantly, other than HP and luck, every other stat is treated the same, but we already know that they're not the same. Strength, magic, and speed are better than skill, defense, and resistance. Additionally, the growth rates and stat caps are all weighted equally. So even though speed is much better than luck, your speed cap and your luck cap are being affected the same. Your speed growth and your luck growth are being affected the same. Now I need to convey this next idea in the fewest words possible. I need to try to make it simple, because otherwise I'm going to just ramble out of control trying to cover all of the different nuances and probably still fail to get the point across. So let me just boil it down. Here's what I'm trying to say. When you pick your asset, it is disproportionately useful to pick powerful stats to increase. And when you pick your flaw, it is disproportionately penalizing to pick good stats to decrease. This really ultimately simplifies the customization process, because there are certain things that you want to get at any cost, and there are certain things you want to avoid at any cost. If you're running physical Robin, you should always avoid lowering your strength or your speed. And if you're running magical Robin, you should always avoid lowering your magic or your speed. Now, because of the way the stat table works and which stats are linked to each other, this creates an unfortunate problem for Robin, or an opportunity depending on how you look at things and how much you enjoy min-maxing. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Magical Robin is just flat out better than physical Robin. It is possible to make a magical Robin build with literally no downsides. You start the game with tome access and a tome in hand. You can go mage into dark mage into sorcerer, or mage into sage into sorcerer. You can progress through your class lines without ever losing tome access. For endgame classes, sage, sorcerer, and dark flyer are some of the best classes in the game, and what do you know, they're all magical classes. There is just so much synergy you get from running a magical build, where every aspect of Robin's kit works together to make the perfect dominant magical build in a game where magical builds are better than physical builds. Magical Robin is capable of easily one-shotting a lot of key enemies in Chapter 5, all the way up to Chapter 10, while holding a 1-2 range weapon, allowing you to completely ignore counter while sweeping enemy groups, even on Lunatic Plus, because you just one-shot everything and take no counter damage. And if you're running the Plus Magic Robin build, this continues past Chapter 10 for a good stretch of the game. Physical Robin has almost the exact opposite qualifiers, and all of these minor issues really add up to make a unit that can still be great, but is just never going to be as dominant as Magical Robin. You start the game with a sword in your hand. Now, this is the worst physical weapon type. If you want to use any other physical build, you have to reset to E-rank weapons whenever you change your class, preferably as soon as possible at level 10. You do still get to choose your optimal class progression path, and you still have access to any of the top tier endgame physical classes. So Robin does always keep that benefit, which is really nice. The big difference here is that it's not possible to make a physical Robin with no downside. Every stat combination is going to sacrifice either strength, speed, or defense. So you always have to make a choice with physical Robin to give up power either in the early, the mid, or the late game, depending on what is most important to you and what feels most comfortable for you to run. It's much harder to one-shot enemies with a physical weapon because the enemy defense is almost always going to be higher than their resistance, and the hand axe and the javelin just have really low base might, so sweeping enemy groups is harder. Keeping all of these facts in mind, I'm not going to limit this discussion to just saying Magical Robin is the best and then end the video. If someone asks me on stream, I'm fine with giving them a simple answer and leaving it at that. I don't want to get too distracted while I'm playing the game. But this isn't a stream, I'm not multitasking, this is a guide video. And if you know anything about my channel, you know that I'm about to yap for a very long time and discuss all of these Robin builds at great length. So let's get to that part of the video. I'm going to take what I consider to be every viable Robin build and discuss which flaws are worth considering for each of these builds. But first, in order to do that, let's quickly throw away all of the assets that you should never choose. First of all, plus HP is really, really bad. It messes up your growths and your stat caps because of the way it was designed. You see, there's no adjusted HP cap in this game, and every character has the same max HP. As a result, in order to get around this problem, they just distributed your sum total of bonuses as tiny increases and decreases out to different random stats that have no synergy with each other and also don't really account for the fact that speed is more valuable than luck, for example. And then they did the same thing with the growths. Now remember, our goal is to min-max by localizing our bonuses into key areas. Spreading out these bonuses and penalties is the exact opposite of what we want to do. As a result, you should pretty much always ignore plus HP and minus HP, because in either case, you're just making this weird decision that does not min-max your build in any way, and instead always hurts your build in at least some small way. I'm also going to mention that Robin is a character who tends to get attacked a lot in a battle, and even a lot of times in a single turn, and every time you get attacked, your defense and resistance increase in value, so this ends up making defense and resistance way more valuable than HP very quickly. Next up is plus skill. This is a worse version of plus strength in every possible way. Luck is the worst stat in this game by far. It is almost a true do-nothing stat in Awakening, and you should never run plus luck. Even the offensive bonuses make no sense because they are spread out instead of being localized. Finally, we have plus defense and plus resistance. I think plus res is basically pointless. It's a worse version of plus magic. However, because it affects your speed, it's also difficult to pick this as a flaw. Minus res comes with a legitimate penalty that will hold Robin back in the mid-game and the endgame. I do think there are use cases for plus defense, and this used to be one of my favorite Robins, and the one I would most often suggest in the past, and I think it's really great for beginners and newcomers to help them get through the early game in Lunatic Plus, but it has a serious problem when it comes to optimization. The secondary stats of plus defense Robin are luck, which is bad, and resistance, which is bad, and even defense is not that great in the long term. This choice basically localizes all of Robin's power into the early game, making it as easy as possible, but heavily sacrifices your mid-game and late-game stat lines. Except that's actually not even true. You're making Robin weaker in the late game and in the mid-game, just like I said, but the truth is that plus magic Robin is actually stronger than plus defense Robin in the early game if you know what you're doing. Once I realized this, I started running plus magic Robin on pretty much every build, and I never looked back. If you see my older guide videos where I talk about the strength of plus defense Robin, I'm just going to say I was wrong back then. I've improved my skills at the game, I've improved my knowledge of the game, and I do think plus magic Robin is just better. Now with that out of the way, let's talk about the viable builds and how do we make them work. The truly viable choices for Robin are either plus magic or plus strength, and there is a little bit of a consideration for plus speed. Now, for all of the reasons we discussed above, you should really almost never pick any other stat other than these three as your asset. If you really know what you're doing, and you're making the choice for some kind of niche reason that gives you a very specific result, maybe you're onto something, but I would encourage you to take a second look at what you're planning, because there's a good chance that you are wrong and you missed something. The stats that I'm outlining here are truly the best in like 99.9% of the cases. It's unfortunate that the system ends up being this simple, but it really is true. Now I'm going to start by talking about what is, in my opinion, the best build in the game, Plus Magic Robin. You get Plus Magic and a little bit of extra speed when you choose this option. It raises your magic base, growths, and caps in a very specific way that allows Robin to one-shot enemies and avoid taking counter damage at pretty much every stage in the game until the late game. And best of all, there is a very clear, obvious, and fantastic choice for a Flaw which complements this build and makes it truly optimal, like min-max Dungeons and Dragons Munchkin build tier. Minus strength only reduces 3 of your stats. Strength is greatly reduced, which is fine because we're never using it. Skill and defense are slightly reduced. Now, these stats are somewhat useful, but they're not that important. Because you're never going to use a physical weapon, you are maximizing the penalty into 1 stat, strength, which literally does nothing for your build. You are giving up nothing, and you are gaining as much power as possible. The only real downside of this build is minus defense, but because of the way enemy damage ranges work, it almost never ends up mattering. Dangerous enemies are going to be dealing 80% of Robin's HP instead of dealing 75% of Robin's HP, and you're still getting 2-shot either way, with or without the minus defense penalty. And when you're fighting weaker enemies, even a minus defense Robin quickly gets to the point where the foes are just dealing irrelevant amounts of tiny chip damage very quickly. There is genuinely like no downside to running plus magic minus strength Robin. It is objectively a stronger version of every other magical character in the game and provides you with a truly optimal endgame build. As a result, there's also no reason to ever pick any other Flaw other than minus strength. All of them are just, every other choice is just you sacrificing something to try to be clever and getting nothing in return. Minus skill takes away points of skill, which you do care about a little bit, and puts them into strength, which does nothing for you. And most of the other choices either lower your magic or lower your speed. So there is really no decision making involved here, but it's only because plus magic minus strength Robin is the best possible build to run, and there's nothing else that really competes with it. Magical Robin is the best version of Robin. Their best possible stat spread is always plus magic minus strength, and funny enough, this simplifies the process of building Robin so much, but of course, it can become boring over time, and Robin is a character with a lot of versatility, so if you want to explore that versatility, if you want them or need them to run a physical build for your team, you still have a lot of other options, a lot of other good options. So here are the best builds you can consider if you're going to run physical Robin to make them as functional as possible. Now first, we have to talk about plus speed. Honestly, this is a very, very overrated asset. I have probably over time become the biggest hater of plus speed, but I want to at least try to be a little bit objective and talk about what this asset can do, even though I personally think it's not very great. For the longest time, people often said that this was the best asset for Robin, and there was very little discussion outside of this meta. And I'm going to be frank, I think plus speed Robin kinda sucks. If you already have enough speed, then it doesn't help you to be any faster. And I can tell you from a lot of experience playing this game, running a plus magic Robin, they are already fast enough. You do not need any extra speed. You just don't need the extra speed from plus speed Robin, so in the end, you're just setting yourself up for an endgame Robin with an inflated speed stat that doesn't matter, and then you're getting extra skill and extra luck. And remember that luck is the worst stat in the game, and skill is not that important. So let's look at this by analyzing the net gain. Magic Robin gets magic and speed. Speed Robin only gets speed, without any magic or strength. It kind of amazes me that it took so long for people to realize that A plus B is better than just getting B. You could say that I'm oversimplifying it, but honestly, I'm really not. It's more like other people were oversimplifying it by saying speed is good, therefore plus speed must be the best Robin. But they were ignoring the nuances, they were ignoring the secondary stats, and the fact that Robin is already fast enough, and they don't need the extra speed. Having said that, we will discuss the plus speed builds. Plus speed minus magic, this allows you to localize most of your penalty into the magic stat, and you can run a physical Robin. The extra speed you get from plus speed is more than what you would lose from minus magic, so this is not a bad trade-off. The character will be faster than plus magic minus strength Robin. The problem is they're not going to have nearly as much strength as a plus magic Robin has in magic, if that makes sense. Next, I would like to talk about plus speed with either minus strength, minus skill, or minus luck. This is just a worse version of Magical Robin in every way. Do not pick any of these builds. These builds were often recommended in the past, especially minus skill and minus luck, and they are strictly worse than plus magic minus strength Robin. They are trying to do the same thing, but with lower stats in the early game, the mid game, and the end game. But it is kind of amazing to look back at how overrated plus speed Robin has historically been, but that's not what this video is about. I don't want to get sidetracked, so let's move on. The only reason why plus speed gets to stay in this part of the video, where I discuss the viable builds, is because plus speed minus magic is a genuine consideration for a physical Robin. However, it is the weakest option for that build. But physical Robin doesn't have one dominant build like magical Robin does, so it's at least worth considering, it's at least worth mentioning and weighing the strengths and weaknesses of each build on the physical side. Even for me, as a plus speed hater, I'm still going to put this out there and let you guys make your own decision. Now let's talk about plus strength Robin. There are a few choices here, and I don't think any one of them is the clear-cut best option. First, we have plus strength minus magic. This tries to copy what the plus magic minus strength Robin does, but for all of the same reasons, it ends up being worse. You only get strength, skill, and defense, which is a lot worse than getting magic and speed. On the flip side, you lose magic, speed, and res, so you're not really drawing all of your negative stats into the magic stat that you're not going to use. In the end, you end up sacrificing a little bit of speed. Robin's speed is like a Goldilocks type situation. You have the power to tune his speed stat or her speed stat to get exactly what you want, but you need a little bit of game knowledge to end up with a useful stat line. Plus speed Robin ends up with too much speed, and you're giving up points for no gain, and the extra points end up being wasted. Plus magic minus strength Robin ends up with just a little bit of extra speed, which ends up being enough to carry them for the entire game. The important thing is that this is not 0. It's +1. So the problem with plus strength minus magic Robin isn't that you're going from 0 to -1. You're actually going from +1 to -1. This loss of 2 points of speed is a bigger cost than it would initially seem if you're only looking at each Robin individually instead of comparing them against other characters and even comparing them against other Robins. For this reason, I think plus strength minus magic is probably the worst choice, and you should probably discard this build, but unfortunately that leaves relatively fewer other options remaining. Plus strength minus skill Robin is pretty viable. You see, strength and skill actually have the same stat line, so if you increase one and decrease the other, they mostly cancel each other out, but the bonuses end up coming out slightly ahead. End of the day, after you simplify everything, the build has +3 strength, +1 defense, and -1 skill. That's not bad. It has no true downside. It doesn't fully take advantage of Robin's ability to run a hyper-optimized build, but you're going to have the same strength as Vake, and he's only going to be slightly faster with slightly more skill. And having a second Vake is not a bad thing. So plus strength minus skill Robin is definitely worth running if you want to. Now I want to talk about plus strength minus defense Robin. I think in the long term, this is the best physical Robin build. Minus defense does a fantastic job of localizing your penalties onto stats that don't matter. We talked about this earlier. Luck is the worst stat in the game. Defense and res are right there at the bottom. Out of the stats that actually matter, minus defense only applies your penalties to luck, defense, and res. As a result, if you pick plus strength minus defense Robin, in the long run, you will get a character who truly has no downside. You have plus 4 strength, plus 2 skill, and a minus 1 defense, and a couple of other penalties and luck and resistance that truly do not matter at all. Even the minus 1 defense really doesn't matter. In the long run, this is the strongest version of physical Robin. Vake is going to be slightly faster, but you will still be fast enough. So the 1 extra point of speed really doesn't matter. This Robin becomes a second Vake who hits harder and crits more often. So you're probably wondering, what's the downside? How could this not be the clear-cut best possible build? The downside is that minus defense affects your base stats in a terrible way, and it makes it very, very difficult for Robin to survive in Chapter 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, Side Story 1, Chapter 5, Chapter 6. I mean, eventually, Robin's defense will catch up to the enemies, but these early chapters are already hard enough, and they are going to become quite difficult. So if you want to run a minus defense Robin, you need to be prepared for a brutal early game slog. However, once you get through it, you will have, in my opinion, the strongest version of physical Robin. So now that I discussed all the builds at length, let's go over them again really quick. First place, plus magic minus strength. This is the best magical Robin build overall. It is the best Robin build overall. It's probably the best build overall in the entire game for any first generation character. We really don't have to say anything about it. It's extremely powerful. This is what you should be using for Robin unless you want to use a physical Robin purely for the sake of personal preference. Second place, we have plus strength minus defense. This eventually becomes a stronger version of Vake, which is really great, but it's more difficult to make it work in the most difficult chapters at the start of the game. So the downside isn't that you have any particularly weak stats, it's just the fact that you're making the game harder for yourself early on, as opposed to plus magic minus strength Robin, which makes the game as easy as possible early on and becomes a god later on. Third place, we have plus strength minus skill. This is a slightly weaker version of Vake, but it's better if you want to make the early game more consistent and sacrifice a little bit of late game optimization in order to not drive yourself insane trying to beat Chapter 5. This build is still really good, so if plus strength minus skill sounds like the best option for your particular playstyle, I would say go ahead and run it. There's really no downside. Next up, we have plus strength minus magic in fourth place. Now this character seems good on the surface, but it is 2 points slower than Vake instead of only being 1 point slower than Vake. You have a much easier time surviving the early game compared to the minus defense Robin, and you still get the top tier strength and top tier skill. But I really have to stress something here. Plus magic minus strength Robin is actually 3 speed faster than plus strength minus magic Robin. It is half of a speed tier of difference that will sneak up on you if you don't understand how the game mechanics work, and you will absolutely feel it as you're playing through the game. You are going to be half of a speed tier slower. On that note, we have fifth place, plus speed minus magic Robin. Now, this point fixes the problems with speed. It's even 2 points faster than Vake, which seems really good. But then you remember, Vake is already a fast enough character, so it's really questionable if these 2 extra points actually accomplish anything. Most notably, you have 3 less strength compared to Vake, and that actually matters. That's 6 damage in a single round of combat. That's 9 damage on your crits. In a game with relatively few options for damage stacking, a difference of 3 points of damage really stands out to me. And again, being 1 point slower than Vake is usually salvageable. So being 2 points faster than Vake doesn't really help you in any meaningful way. I would personally never run plus speed Robin ever again. Finally, I want to conclude by talking about which builds Robin can and should be running as a lead unit. Now, unfortunately, because Robin has so much versatility, I cannot sit here and talk about every possible build, but I am going to do my best to highlight some of the standout class progression lines. male magical Robin typically has two good options. You either go Tactician right into Dark Mage, right into Sorcerer, and then you just stay in Sorcerer forever. This build is extremely low effort, extremely low cost, and extremely effective. You get Hex and Anathema, which allows you to pick pretty much any pair-up partner for Robin as long as they give Robin speed. Literally, the only thing you need to make this build work is a pair-up partner that gives speed to Robin, and they will be viable for the entire game, even on Lunatic Plus. Next up, we have Tactician into Mage, into Sage, into Sorcerer. Now this build requires a few extra second seals, more effort, and a higher cost, but it's just a more powerful version of the same build. You're going to have a +7 damage stack compared to the vanilla Sorcerer. You have generally higher stats because you spent more levels grinding in a base class. You're going to have Focus for +10 crit. It would be nice to have a partner with Hex and Anathema, but the problem is you don't really have a lot of great options. There are a few ways to make this build work. You can use Saria, but she really struggles to give speed. You can pick a second generation character and give them the exact class combination and skill combination in order to supercharge your Robin. This pretty much always works. You can also pick a partner who gives speed and just live without Hex and Anathema. You have Focus anyway, it kind of makes up for it a little bit. You can also play female Robin and use Henry as your partner, and you end up with a partner who has Hex, Anathema, and the Trickster class. This female Robin with Henry synergy is pretty overlooked, and is something I want to explore more in a future run. Other than that, if you're willing to give up Hex and Anathema, or if you want to just take like extra steps going through extra class lines, female Robin can use Lonku or Gaius. Male Robin can also use Miriel. Technically, Miriel can do something like Mage, Dark Mage, Troubadour, Valkyrie, or like Mage, Sage, Valkyrie. Maribel can do Troubadour directly into Valkyrie. These options are fine. They're not optimal, but I think these examples really draw another line for emphasis on the underlying issue of this build. It is extremely powerful, but it requires more effort and more resources across the board, not just for Robin, but also for their partner. So if you want to run like Tactician, Mage, Sage, Sorcerer, you really need to plan things out ahead of time and be prepared to do the extra work to make this build truly shine. As for female Robin, she can run both of the builds mentioned above, but she has access to Dark Flyer, which completely throws a wrench in every discussion. This fundamentally changes how you can and how you should run Robin's build. In truth, most of the skills in Awakening do very little or basically do nothing, with very few exceptions. The biggest exception to that rule is Galeforce. This skill is so powerful and so dominant, it literally allows the player to use completely unique strategies that only work if you have Galeforce. It changes how you can play the game and adds tools and strategies to your kit that are otherwise impossible to replicate. The closest thing you can do is spam rescue stabs, and even still, it doesn't accomplish the exact same thing. So needless to say, if you're running female Robin, the reason should be because you want Galeforce access. Now, classically, people would run Tactician into Pegasus into Darkflyer in order to get Galeforce as fast as possible, and then reclass into your intended class line. I think getting Galeforce eventually is better, rather than trying to get it as soon as possible. What you should really be thinking about in the short term is how to optimize Robin's early game progression to make the early game easier and pick up nice skills along the way if you can. Here's a great example. Let's modify one of the builds we were just talking about a moment ago. Tactician into Mage into Sage. Now instead of going Sorcerer, you go right into Dark Flyer. You have a beautiful +7 damage stack. You have Robin extremely deadly in the Dark Flyer class even before they get Galeforce. And what's even better is that you spend this entire time with Tome access. There's never an awkward period like reclassing into Pegasus and being stuck with E-rank lances and your power level just falling off a cliff. You can run all of the best early game plus magic minus strength Robin strategies that are literally Lunatic plus Iron Man consistent in Mage, sweep through all of the most difficult chapters in the game with your guaranteed one-shots to play around counter, and then later you just switch over to Dark Flyer, and you're going to get Galeforce at the point when Galeforce access actually starts to matter and become important to play around difficult late-game enemy formations. Now, physical Robin is a weird journey, and I'm going to be completely honest, I'm not sure if I know what the best path of progression is, especially when we're thinking about Galeforce. So one idea is Tactician, Wyvern, Wyvern Lord, Dark Flyer, Falcon Knight. This is really messy. It's kind of weird because you actually end up getting Galeforce around the same time or even sooner than a magical build, even though it seems like it would be more complicated. Plus, you're getting Strength +2, you're getting the value and the utility of having an additional flying combat unit early on. You can train your Lance rank while you're in Wyvern Lord. There's a lot of benefits here. This build is actually stronger than it seems on the surface. It looks messy, but it's actually really good. And once you get Galeforce, you switch over to Falcon, you're going to have a flying lance using class, and you can get Lance Fair. And then at the end, you can even switch over to Great Knight if you want to boost your combat stats through the roof. Because if you didn't know, Great Knight has massive stats across the board. The other idea is trying to get your fair skills as soon as possible, so you can do Tactician into Archer or Tactician into Myrmidon. These can kind of work, but they're a little bit clunky. You're going to be constantly swapping between E-rank weapons, resetting your progress, trying to get Galeforce. I don't love it, but maybe you could make it work. I would have to test it myself in order to be more confident. If you have personally run something like Tactician, Archer, Sniper, Dark Flyer, back into Sniper, or back into Assassin, let me know, because I would be curious to hear in the comments how this build worked for you. I would say Tactician, Pegasus, Falcon, Dark Flyer is a really good option for physical female Robin. This is probably the most straightforward version of the build. Now finally, I want to take a quick moment and highlight Robin's value as a back row character, because they can very quickly complete any build that is required to support any front row character in the game. I am not kidding when I say that Robin might be the optimal marriage partner for every single character in this game. I say it often whenever I'm answering questions for people on Reddit or in the comments on my own videos. There might be a few exceptions to this rule hidden here or there, and some characters that can kind of tie with Robin, but it's pretty incredible how well they can just support anyone and bring any value that you need to the table. I'm going to make an entire video guide later, which talks about the best lead classes and the best support classes in Awakening, so I'm not going to go into too much depth on this topic here today, but I want to say that if you want Robin to play a support role, they have two things that make this idea really exceptional, and it's honestly viable. You don't need to run Robin as a lead. The first thing is that they have the class progression needed to support any character, and most characters don't really have an optimal support partner other than Robin. The second thing is solidarity. This is a top tier aura that every character in the game really wants to receive, and Robin and their children are the only characters who can provide it. And this kind of sucks when you're running Robin as a lead, because they can't give solidarity to themselves. So running Robin as a backpack unit actually kind of fixes this problem of not being able to take advantage of solidarity. Okay, so here's the basic idea how to build a support Robin character. You rely on them heavily in chapters 1 through chapter 12, just as normal. You just play Robin the same way as normal all the way up to chapter 12. Then, while you're leading up to chapter 16, you want to take advantage of every training opportunity that you can in order to rotate Robin into the rear and put their partner into the lead more often to get as much experience as possible while you're waiting to get infinite second seals after chapter 16. Try to run a Robin build that allows them to get the relevant fair skills for the back row. You can't use Luna in the back row. You can't use Astra. You can't use Ignis in the back row, but you can benefit from Tome Fair in the back row. You can benefit from Axe Fair in the back row. Try to get Strength +2 or Magic +2 if you can. These are really nice to have, although they are less important if they're going to make your early game harder. Finally, around chapter 16, you want to rotate Robin's partner into the lead permanently and second steal Robin into one of these classes for the rest of the game. To support a physical partner, you typically want to end up in Paladin. Berserker is a fine second choice for male Robin because they want to keep an axe in their hands. And Assassin is really great if you want Robin to be a bow user in the back row, which is actually honestly a really nice thing and might be just as good as Paladin. It's tougher to build compared to Paladin, but ultimately you get a really great back row option. If you're supporting a magical partner, you typically want to run Dark Flyer if you can, or Valkyrie, while you're preparing to switch into Dark Flyer later. Unfortunately, these options are restricted to female Robin. However, there is something that fixes male Robin and makes them just as good. So first of all, you do have the option of going through Trickster if you want a physical Robin supporting a magical husband or wife. You want to try to get Swordfair if you can. It's the same Swordmaster into Trickster build that Gaius and Lonku both like running in the back row, and honestly, I think Gaius and Lonku are better at running this build. The other option, however, is actually Grandmaster. This is a Robin exclusive class, and what's great is that it actually fixes their problem as a back row support partner. Without this class, male Robin would be really limited, but with this class you can provide pretty much the same bonus as Trickster or Dark Flyer Robin, and you get to keep access to tomes. So to summarize, if Robin is supporting a magical partner, you want to run Trickster or Grandmaster or Dark Flyer. These are all great options for different reasons. If you're supporting a physical partner, Paladin is usually the best option for Robin, but there are a good number of cases where either Assassin for bows or Berserker for axes can be a powerful side grade or even an upgrade over Paladin Robin. And if you've never tried it before, just try to run Support Robin one time. I think you'll be genuinely impressed with the results. I hope this video has done a good job of showcasing just why Robin is such a dominant character and helped you understand the best way to use them in order to get the most out of Robin's strengths. They are pretty universally agreed to be one of the 3 strongest characters in the game, and many people still believe that Robin is the strongest character in Awakening. But I still think, even with that, a lot of people don't fully grasp or understand all of the reasons why Robin is so powerful. It's not just having access to Veteran and gaining more levels. This ability to pick any build in the game, run the best version of it, and min-max your stats to hyper-optimize your character to be a better version of Vake or a better version of Saria is so much more valuable, even more than people give Robin credit for, oftentimes. Now, if you want to see more videos like this, just go check out the other guides on my channel. At this point, there is a mountain of them, and consider subscribing if you want to see more. Oh, also, leave a like if you liked this one, please. But for now, enjoy the rest of your day.